All righty. Uh, Welcome once again for anybody joining me live. Matt, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to come and speak with me. I know that
Sure.
you are all over the place, several videos. You have the hang up now, which I really enjoy that concept of play off of what you do on AXP. Do you have anything, future projects coming?
Oh yeah, a lot of stuff. I don't give a name to too much of it, but I'm adding another show on the Line Network that's specifically a debate in a 1 hour format, and it's not going to be like, oh, invite in massive apologist whoever. Although that would be fine. I mean, if some of my former debate opponents wanted to call in, the primary thing is for anybody who feels that maybe they didn't get a fair shake on the atheist experience or the hang up, or the accusations all the time of, oh, Matt just hangs up when he's challenged. Well, then, okay, submit your case, and we'll put it on with a kind of moderator and do a short format debate. I don't want to go on forever, but if it should be, if we pick a narrow enough topic, then somebody could present their position in 5 to 10 minutes. I offer a rebuttal, then we discuss for 10 to 15 minutes and then take questions from the audience and then call it a day. And I don't know. You can vote on who won. I don't look at debates as if they're win-lose, but if somebody wants to vote, then by all means, I don't care if I lose every vote as long as I'm doing good and representing what I think.
Yeah, I always wonder, does anybody actually win or lose a debate? It seems like both sides kind of gravitate to the other one, but I always try to look at it as in who had the best argumentation. And so I would say I've seen plenty of arguments where Christians have lost the debate.
And I think I've called out before. I think Hitchens lost a debate against Bill Craig, because Hitchens did what Hitchens did, which is he sat there with his Johnny Walker Black and went through his shtick and said wonderful things that appealed to the atheists and did his clever mockery of religion. And rarely was there anything that he said that I disagreed with. But in a debate, if you're not willing to address the subject that your opponent has presented, I don't see how you can view that as anything other than a lose. Like if I walk in and I present the affirmative case for something, and that my opponent just never addresses my affirmative case, then it's not a debate. It's just two people talking about what their opinion is. Not as interesting.
No. And then something else I found interesting as I've watched your videos over the years is you've mentioned this love for magic. And for me, it was growing up watching Penn and Teller and just like how, wondering how did they do this? Like, how was the guy buried alive? How did they pull the rabbit out of the hat? Like, what kind of got you into that?
Well, I'm 52, and so I have home video, or home not actually, it was saw on Super 8 because video didn't exist then. But when I was 3 or 4, I got my first magic kit, which was like I think it may have been Kenner, but it was the hat full of magic, and so it was this hard plastic hat, and it had all kinds of stuff in it. I've been tempted to go buy one, like as a collector's item, to put it on my shelf with, other magic items. Mm-hmm. I just haven't found one that is like new in box or guaranteed to have all the bits. And I kind of want to reopen it from the scratch. So if I can find an unopened hat full of magic, I'll definitely buy it. But I watched, Doug Henning was incredibly popular when I was a kid, and it was, and eventually David Copperfield, who I saw live and got to meet in St. Louis, and I showed him a card trick because he's kind enough to, like Penn and Teller, just sit outside and take autographs and meet people afterwards. But yeah, so Doug Henning was my first real introduction to magic. And then I started, I lived in St. Louis at the time, and so DeVoe's Magic Den was there, and John Mendoza worked there. I didn't know who John was at the time. Later, I discovered, hey, one of the greatest card magicians that's ever lived is the guy who's selling me magic and occasionally, teaching me something or pointing me in a different direction rather than, hey, don't buy the next trinket. Here's this Paul Harris book. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a huge Paul Harris fan and have all of his first edition books, including the spiral bound one that I bought from John then.
Yeah, I think when I was a kid, I used to love buying, like you said, the little kits, like for like $3, and
Sure.
um, I never like to tell people how tricks are done because I think that takes away from the illusion of what's going on. But um, I used to love like going in there, reading it, and then pulling these on my parents, and then they're like, what happened?" But I always made the mistake of doing the trick again a couple times in front of them, and then they caught me.
Yep. I told, I did well, I've had a number of magician friends over the years. I mean, Ian Rowland just did Atheist Experience this past week. He's a mentalist and author, and probably one of the world's foremost experts on cold reading. But Michael Kent is a friend of mine who's also a magician. I had him on the Hang Up. He's going to be on AXP at some point as well. And it's not just, oh, Matt's getting all of his magician friends on the show. No, I have plenty of magician friends that will never be on Atheist Experience, some of whom are wonderful, who I love dearly. But I want to have people who have an interest in this, because not every magician it has the same degree of interest, despite the fact that as a skeptic, I keep pointing out that it's magicians who are the experts in fooling people. I'm basically not only was I friends with James Randi, but I'm a Randi devotee in the sense that I'm going to keep preaching his particular version of skepticism until I'm stuck in the ground. So.
No. And along that lines, when you mentioned cold reading, I've heard that before, but what exactly would cold reading be? It's like, is that like where they have the person in the audience and they're like, somebody's grandmother passed away and they start narrowing down, or is that something different?
Essentially, yeah. So cold reading, and Ian addressed this, is pretty straightforward. All it is giving someone a reading cold, in which case I know nothing about you. You stuck me in a room with somebody I don't know, and you can give a reading. There's many methods, and actually, so Ian's book, The Full Facts of Cold Reading, which I showed on the show on Sunday, that is a good example. But it's the primary name cold reading is to distinguish it from hot reading, which is, like, for example, John Edwards, who was awarded the title biggest douche in the universe, I think, from South Park, who is, he was one of those talk to the dead, air quotes, psychics. Some of the information that he would put forward would suggest that he was doing what's called hot reading. And that is, at some of those events, you have the audience fill out cards, just as a church would sometimes with prayer cards, who do you want to pray for? And so you go into a John Edwards thing and you fill out a card, and it's like, who are you? Who are you trying to make? Who has passed that you're trying to make contact? And you fill in all this information. And so it's not all that impressive then if people filled out cards and I'm standing around going, there's someone over here. Oh my gosh, there's a woman, and an older woman, when she passed, who's standing just to the right of you and back, which would suggest it was on your mom's side, that type of thing. It's a little bit of Barnum effect. It is a little bit of BSing, and it's in that case a hot reading because they knew stuff about you coming in. Cold reading just means I'm going to meet someone that I know nothing about other than that they are a human being. So all of the things that generally apply to human beings are going to apply to it. James, I sit here and as I look at you, you're looking a little bit yellow today, but it doesn't seem that I don't think this is a health issue for you. Is this a technology issue? That type of thing could be fun.
Yeah. Those inferences are, or you see a wrestling shirt like the Cactus Jack shirt, and
Yep.
You're like, so you must be into sports or athletics, or are you a physical person? Like, I get you.
Yeah, that's not so much cold reading. Now, cold reading has a lot of different methods, and I don't want to misrepresent it. It'd be better to talk to Ian about it. But basically, it just means I didn't know anything about you. So I can use a ton of different methods, which may or may not include reading body language and other things. But yeah, and I'm no expert on cold reading. I've given examples of it on the show a couple times, just real quickly. And as part of my Magic and Skepticism show, I once included a brief segment that included some cold reading, but it wasn't essential and it wasn't very good.
No. And then, so you've shared this a lot before. Like you were a Christian, you were a devout believer, and then you were trying to convert your atheist roommate, I believe, and then he ended up deconverting you. Is that kind of what led you to this path of skepticism?
Well, I was a skeptic long before. I'd been a skeptic for years. From the first time I understood what skepticism was, I identified as a skeptic. It's just that I hadn't been skeptical of my religious beliefs. I'd been skeptical of other things. Hey, I'm skeptical of ghosts and goblins and Bigfoot and UFOs. And it's when I finally learned that skepticism applies to everything, that basically it's about wanting a good reason to believe, and that I should believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. So I hoped to have a conversation with my roommate who was an atheist, but I found my way out of it before he and I actually had that conversation. The first real conversation we had about this was me saying, hey, I think I'm kind of agnostic. And so it wasn't anything so much he did. It was just his existence that led me to try to find the best way to, how do you convert an atheist? I didn't want to get to heaven and have God say, hey, here's this guy who you love like a brother, who you lived with. And, I gave you under 1 Peter 3:15, I gave you this obligation to share the gospel and let the Holy Spirit work through you. And you didn't do it. So why not? And I set out, okay, let me find the best way to do this. And in the process of finding the best way, I found that all of the ways that I could find were fundamentally flawed. And eventually, not even without ever having a conversation, I found my way out of religion. So,
and I like, from my Christian perspective, when we quote 1 Peter 3:15, but we always forget that end part with
the second part. Yeah.
Yeah. Gentleness and kindness, so that, I'll be found above reproach. Because I think sometimes we come off and we want to defend some of the most outrageous things, or we want to make bold, angry kind of assertions. And then in the same times, I know that it's atheists and Christians, and everybody does this online because it's the toxicity. Sure. But I find that at times we can be hypocrites as Christians on that one.
Anybody can be a hypocrite about stuff. I leave out the second part of the verse because it's only the first part that I'm truly interested in. And I don't mean that snarky or snide. What I'm saying is I want my Christian friends to be eager and willing to share the reasons for their belief. I don't care if they do it with gentleness and respect or kindness or anything. I just want to know, because if it's true, I would like to know that. And if it's not true, I'd like to expose that, because if in fact, like if for example, the version of God that I believed in when I was a Southern Baptist, if that turns out to be real, well, it's someone I still wouldn't worship, because for lots of reasons, but I would at least believe. But if it turns out there's some other God, I wouldn't want to have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Like I found mine didn't have good enough evidence, so I excluded all of them. That would be a mistake. That would be fallacious. And so working down that path of trying to have conversations, I don't care if somebody is a complete jackass to me, or I don't care if they don't have any respect or anything else, but if they're able to present a reasoned, evidence-based defense of their position, that's what I want.
No, that's good. I think that we all should work on what is the justification for what we believe. And if you don't know what that justification is, you should put that to the test. Yeah. I completely agree. Before we went on, we had mentioned the argument that seems to be everybody's talking about, and you had mentioned they go through cycles, and this would be the Kalam cosmological argument. What is your position on this when people bring it up to you?
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting because you were like, oh, everybody seems to be hot on the Kalam right now. And I'm like, oh, again, because in the 16 years I've hosted Atheist Experience, it's like for a while, Pascal's wager is the go-to. And then it's the Kalam cosmological argument. And then it's an argument for morality, or a teleological argument, or the anthropic principle. And it rotates through this because, they keep pushing it, putting it up, and then they get swatted down. And it's like, oh, let me find something else. Maybe that will work. So for the Kalam is simple. And there's one thing that I'm going to be accused of getting wrong. But my understanding is that, first of all, cosmological arguments are a category of arguments. They're not just one. The Kalam happens to be one in this category. And it's because the original versions of the cosmological argument had a problem. And when that problem got exposed, that's where we get to the Kalam. And so the Kalam is this: everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause for its existence. That is the entirety of the Kalam. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore the universe had a cause for its existence. Now, there's only 2 premises, so what are you going to address? Well, first of all, how do you demonstrate that the universe had a cause for its existence? How do you demonstrate the universe began to exist? What does begin to exist even mean? Because if our current cosmology is correct, then time and space began at a moment, and we don't know what was before there. We don't know if our universe began to exist. We don't know if our local universe began to exist. We don't know if there was a multiverse already in existence. We don't know if there was a God that was in there that was creating. We don't know anything before that. So to say the universe began to exist is really just saying there was a point prior to which the current model of our universe and space-time didn't exist. And I'm fine with that. But the first premise is everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. And that's a rather convoluted way to state this. And so, first of all, why do we include everything that begins to exist? Is there something that didn't begin to exist? Oh, they want to claim that there's a God that didn't begin to exist. So this entire first premise is designed to exclude the objection to previous versions of the cosmological arguments, which would say everything has a cause for its existence. And then people would say, oh, well, if everything has a cause, what about God? Okay, well, now what that means is that the Kalam's first premise is nothing but an assertion and special pleading, because what they want to say is that if something begins to exist, it has a cause. I have no real objection with that. But here's the bigger problem. Premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. What's the conclusion of the Kalam? Therefore, the universe had a cause for its existence. There is nothing in the Kalam cosmological argument that tells you anything at all about that cause, whether it's an agent or not, whether it is a thinking agent or not, whether it is an existing thinking agent or not, because there's nothing. If we assume that the Kalam was sound, that the premises are true because the structure is valid, so if we assume it's sound, then all we could say is something sufficiently capable of causing a universe caused a universe, but we still don't know what that is. So the Kalam cosmological argument can never be an argument for the existence of God on its own, because it doesn't include God in any of the terms anywhere. The word God does not exist, and the concept of God does not exist. It's just basically saying, gosh, something had to start it all, and that something sounds a lot like the God that people are talking about. And that's cool because it's true. If we reach the conclusion that something had to start it all, it's definitely the case that many of the gods people talk about, that sounds a lot like something that could start a universe. But the fact that people are positing things that are sufficient doesn't mean they're necessary and doesn't mean they exist. You got to demonstrate that with actual evidence and some other argument.
No, I agree. It's a probabilistically argument or probability argument where I'm stating that everything that I observe has a cause. So then I'm running that if the universe began, then it has a cause. But you did bring up an interesting challenge that at the same time, I'm wanting to say that God didn't have a cause. So I am asserting that there is somewhere within that principle something that didn't have a cause to its existence.
Yeah. And the thing is, let's assume, and being as charitable as possible, I have no example of something that didn't begin to exist. However, the singularity that is proposed for our universe may be something that never began to exist. It's just that space-time began and expanded, and so that is the explanation for that. It's nonsensical to ask what happened before time, because there's no such thing as before time. That's only us looking at it in an abstract sense. Time begins, and prior to that I can't even talk about anything. But if you assume that there's something that didn't begin to exist, what's the justification for assuming that it's a thinking agent super being that can do all this, rather than just assuming there is either a singularity or a multiverse or something there that's purely natural that you don't have to apply motivations to, that existed forever? I don't understand why that couldn't be the thing that existed forever. We don't have any ability to investigate either one of them, so we're kind of stuck. I can't show you a God and say, look, it's existed forever. And I can't show you a multiverse and say, look, it's existed forever. So my thing with the whole, mainly all of the cosmological arguments, but especially the Kalam, is, yes, it would be really nice if we understood how and why there's something rather than nothing, how and why this particular universe exists, but we don't know. And the people who are claiming to know, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to accuse people of lying, but you're not a Christian because of the Kalam, and you're definitely not a Christian because of the transcendental argument for the existence of God. And I don't think there's a single person on the planet who is sincerely a Christian because of the transcendental argument for the existence of God. And I don't see how anybody could be a Christian because of the Kalam, because the Kalam doesn't mention God or the Christian God. And so we're using, not we, because let me put my Christian hat back on for a second. Christian apologists are using arguments that are not the reason they believe. I know you agree with this and kind of mentioned it. There's a reason I don't point that out. And I want people to be clear on this. For example, William Lane Craig uses a version of the Kalam cosmological argument, uses a version of the moral argument, and has publicly said, I can't point you to it, but it's out there, that these aren't the reasons that he came to believe. He came to believe because of the inner witness of the Holy Spirit. Now, there are atheists out there who want to use that as ammunition. Ha ha, these Christians, man, they're going out there and they're defending their God with things that isn't even the reason they came to believe. Ha ha ha. And my response to that is, so what? I could have come to believe in a God for really bad reasons and found better reasons later. The fact that someone isn't presenting the thing that convinced them is irrelevant. If they're presenting the thing that they think should convince someone else, that's what matters. And so Craig could believe, he could have come across a platypus in the wild, and the platypus mentally projected a vision of Jesus into his head, and that could be the reason that Craig believes, but he can't prove that to anybody else. And so he presents the best arguments that he can. And that's why, I've talked about this many times. I spend as much or more time trying to correct atheists on bad arguments and bad faith representations of what's going on. We can all do a bit better, but the most frustrating for me, before anybody asks, in every single debate and every single call to any of the shows, is when I ask a question that has like a yes or no answer, people avoid it like the plague because they suspect it's a trap. But really, it's a way of making sure we don't sit here in the mud talking about 20 things that don't matter. When I ask somebody, okay, do you believe in a God? Now, that's pretty straightforward. Do you believe in a God? Any God? Let's just start there. I have people who won't answer that. Oh, well, it's this thing, and I wouldn't know if what I was calling was maybe a God, but I think maybe I could be comfortable calling it a higher power or whatever. I'm like, how do we make any progress if we cannot even adequately describe what it is that you are convinced of, and you're unaware of what you're convinced of? Anyway, I got off on a tangent there. My apologies, James.
No, I mean, that's good. It's kind of what I like having that on the channel, because I want to redirect these conversations, because I feel like we get Darth Dawkins and we get these kind of things going, and then people are trolling each other, and then the conversations don't go anywhere. I had a friend who recently was an atheist for a while, and then he converted to Islam. That kind of blew up in the community. I did appreciate one thing you had said about it, which was they didn't want to call him by his Islamic name, and you had called him out, and you had said you're wanting to address people for dead naming people, but then this gentleman just wants to be called Khalil, and you won't give him that proper name. So, I mean, from a person, I appreciated that, because I'm like, that's what people need to hear. We need to have that respect.
I don't want to co-opt your show for this, but I kind of want to address it because somebody sent me a clip of him talking about me during an interview on another channel just a couple of days ago. And what's strange is somebody had reached out to me and said, "Hey, have you heard?" Crap, he's going to think I'm doing this on purpose. His name starts with a J. It's Justin Jeremiah, whatever. His old name, his dead name. I forget exactly what it is. But they like, "Hey, have you heard this person is now a Muslim and would like to be called Khalil Ali or something like that?" My apologies. And yes, I corrected him. Hey, use whatever name this person wants. I mean, are you asking Teller for his birth certificate? Are you asking Oprah for her birth certificate? Are you going to, oh, that's not your real name. That's not your full name. It's just ridiculous to me. But I had done this person's podcast twice, evidently, although I say yes to pretty much anybody who wants to have me on as long as my schedule allows. And I sometimes forget what I've done. And so this person reached out to me and they were like, oh, he was trash talking you in this video and saying that, you're, I forget what the actual accusation was. And I was like, well, that's his prerogative. I don't know him. But what ended up happening is he starts giving interviews where he's talking about how, and he posts on Facebook, and evidently me and Aaron Raw and everybody were all just obsessed over his conversion. And the truth is, I don't know anything about whether Aaron Raw was obsessed over it. I didn't remember him. I didn't even remember doing his show twice. Oh, wait. Oh, you were the empathetic atheist. Okay, I realize I've done that show. But I wasn't concerned. I wasn't reaching out. I wasn't trying to protect anything. I had zero interest in his conversion to Islam. And yet he played it up as if I did. And so I had a private conversation with him, and I asked him to stop using my name to claim that I was like obsessed with his transition, because I didn't give a damn. It didn't matter to me at all. It wasn't my thing. And I thought that was fine. And evidently he did a podcast the other day, and I saw a clip from it where he, mentioned that I had told people to use his new name and gave me credit for that. But he followed it up immediately by going, but then, I had to remind him he'd done my show not once, but twice. And I think Matt's trying to downplay how big of a deal it was. Okay, here, this is really easy. The people who know me know that I'm absolutely going to forget people's names and which podcasts I've done, because I just do so much. But if you think that I was a decent enough person to defend your use of a name, but that somehow I was lying when I said I didn't remember you because you're just too much of a big deal, when even the umpteenth show about you has, I mean, the very notion that this guy was somebody major in the movement is laughable. But it doesn't matter how big you are in the movement. My issue is, are you willing to defend your new position, your new faith? And he wasn't willing to have that conversation. I didn't even really ask or push for that. But yet he can't get my name out of his mouth. And so he's doing another podcast, and he goes from saying something nice about me to then accusing me of lying about whether or not I remember him. I was like, okay. I'm sorry that you're not, having, it's just frustrating to me to have people actively lying, or in this case, I suspect that Matt is trying to downplay how big of a deal this was. You don't know nothing about my life. Literally in my entire life, even after people told me that he changed his mind, the number of times he enters my mind is, well, zero until there's a new link from someone saying, oh, he's talking about you again. And it's like, I get it. You want to make it sound like you're a big deal. So you're going to rattle, you list the bigger names. It's like, I have a lot of magician friends who are world famous, world champions. Hey, I'm friends with Sean Farquhar, 2-time world champion. I could drop that name all the time, and I probably have a little bit. But the difference is that Sean and I have actually been in the same room, sat down at a Tim Hortons and riffed on magic, sat down at a bar and riffed on magic. We've done this multiple times. Not just, hey, I showed up on a podcast to try and help you guys out, and now you've changed your mind on something. I don't get it. All right, I take that back. I do get it. It is valuable for him to pretend like he was a bigger deal than he was. And I'm not saying he's a nobody. I'm just saying, in the grand scheme of things, it's not like, me or Aaron or Seth or Dawkins or somebody else became a Muslim. It's somebody that hadn't demonstrated any real proficiency in defending atheism or standing against it. It's more like a host, I guess. Because I didn't know the show. Anyway, now I've wasted like 10 minutes defending myself.
No, I wanted to give you, I like to give the guests time to explain and expound upon things, so no worries or issues at that. I would say that, like, I do see this, and separate from Justin, but like, I have people messaging me because they knew you were coming on my show, and they're like, how do you know Matt Dillahunty? And I'm like, he was just a kind gentleman that I've messaged a few times, and he's came on a few shows for me. Like, I'm not best friends with Matt. Like, But I said, so it's like, I agree with you. You don't want to overplay up um, how you know people, or like, I'm not a big deal because Matt Dillahunty was kind and came to my show. I'm just simply James, a Christian who wants to elevate the conversation from whatever my 300 subscriber level can do.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because right now there's somebody in chat who's like, you know nothing. You do not know what you've done. Justin is not lying. Oh, well, first of all, Justin is lying if he claims I was obsessed or concerned about his transition in any sense, apart from somebody messaging me. And when he accuses me of not remembering him or of pretending to not remember him, all he's doing is showing his ass because my memory for people I've worked with once or twice, especially just during a pandemic online, is laughable. But yeah. But anyway, that doesn't mean anything. It's not a big deal. And I don't bear him any ill will. And hey, would you ever debate him? Probably not. I don't think he has the expertise to do a debate. But I'd be happy to have a conversation with him. And I'm not. But I'm not running around trying to make myself seem something bigger because of other people's names. I do what I do. People like it. They don't like it. They agree. They don't agree. Whatever.
And I like to try to get people to come together. So what I'll do is, I'll message Justin and I'll tell him that you're interested in having just a discussion, not even necessarily on a public forum, but just that conversation.
Yeah. I'm just, sorry, I'm having a fun little back and forth with somebody in chat. But yeah, I want to make sure we stick to your format because we've got to the 30 minutes, but I'm happy to talk more and answer more questions, especially not about drama bullshit.
No. Maybe we'll hit like one more, and then I really want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
So we've talked before, like when it comes to the arguments for God's existence, and I have, like for me, it was personal revelation that convinced me God exists. But I've heard a lot recently that you can philosophically reason to God's existence. What are your thoughts on that? If philosophical argumentation to land on a conclusion
without evidential support, just a pure reasoned argument without any tie to reality, I don't know how you could demonstrate the truth of anything. Because in that sense, all you're working with is the abstractions. A philosophically valid argument or a logically valid argument is about the structure, and then its soundness is about the truth or the acceptance, I suppose, is probably a better way to put it, of the premises. And so, yes. So like, look at the Kalam cosmological argument. Does it demonstrate that if in fact everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence, then the universe has a cause for its existence? Yes, it absolutely does. That's what happens with valid structure. But I had to put the word if in there because there's an if about what we mean by the universe starting. And there's an if in there about whether or not everything that begins to exist has a cause. So when you're looking at that without a tie to empirical evidence, to the epistemic reality that we share, as far as we can tell, I don't know what a pure reason argument could do. Like, I don't know. Do you have an example of a pure reason argument that gets to God without a tie to reality?
I can't think of one where I wouldn't have to put something observable in real life into the application to get there. And then we talked about the Kalam, and the Kalam is a probability argument. So I don't know that apart from having revelation.
I don't think the Kalam's I don't think the Kalam's a probability argument at all. It's a deductive argument. There's not a probabilistic thing at all. So it's not a modal argument. Anyway, I just didn't want that to sit there just in case somebody was like, Matt didn't even acknowledge this, because that's my life. It's somebody, oh, you got it all wrong. You're an idiot. You don't know anything. Okay.
No, you're good. I'm just the past 6 months really digging into philosophy because I didn't really have much of a philosophical background. So all this is news to me. So definitely correcting me on things is good. Well, we're at the 35-minute mark. I told you I'd keep you 30. Do you have any closing thoughts or something you want to plug before I hit the outro and end it?
No. I'm fine. I just, you had been kind to me and good discussions, and you're like, hey, you want to come talk for a half an hour? I'm like, yeah, I'm locked in my house. I'm happy to come talk for a half an hour with somebody. So yeah, no, I don't have anything to plug. Just trying to help out people who were nice. So thanks.
Alrighty, and thank you again, guys, in the chat. I'm gonna go and hit the outro.